The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Upon those who dwelled in the land of gloom, a light has shone. You have brought them abundant joy and great rejoicing. For a child is born to us, a son is given us. Upon his shoulder dominion rests. They name him Wonder Counselor, God Hero, Father forever, Prince of Peace. Brothers and sisters, the message of Christmas, that light has come in to banish the darkness of this world through the person of Jesus Christ, whose birth we celebrate. He is the child born to us, the Prince of Peace. Eternal light has come into the world. Let the heavens be glad, we sang in the responsorial psalm, and let the earth rejoice, for he comes. He comes to rule the earth. He rules with justice, with mercy, and the most powerful force in the universe, love. Brothers and sisters, we welcome this message into our lives, don't we? Who of us does not need the grace to appear to us, as Titus talked about it in the second reading, Paul's letter to Titus? We heard in that reading, the grace of God appeared, saving all. To see the grace of God, to find the grace of God, to feel it in our hearts, is to have hope. To have that grace with us gives us hope for the realization of the Christmas message and the birth of Jesus. That light coming into the world gives us hope in all circumstances. In every situation, we continue to hope. Do you need hope this Christmas? Do you find it difficult to find hope as Christmas dawns? I know sometimes I do. It's an elusive thing at times. As we look at the world, certainly, we look at a lot of what transpires in our country. We see the reality of violence and hatred among people. We all struggle in our families, in our relationships, in our work. Sometimes we tend to focus on the difficult things, the bad things that are happening, and hope then is somewhat elusive, hard to grasp. But it is there for us. And God desires for us to experience that hope in a renewed way at Christmas. Each one of us here tonight, to have that hope rekindled. This evening, Pope Francis is opening the Jubilee year, 2025. Every 25 years is a Jubilee year. And the Holy Father has named the theme for this year to be hope, and that all of us are pilgrims of hope. He said this: to hope is to wait for something that has already been given to us, salvation in the eternal and infinite love of God. To hope is to welcome this gift that God offers us every day. To hope is to savor the wonder of being loved, sought, and desired by God, who did not hide in his impenetrable skies, but became flesh, blood, history, and days to share our fate. We become pilgrims of hope when we search for hope, but also when we experience a renewed sense of hope in our hearts. What do we need to do then to rekindle this in ourselves? Well, first, as we know, it's about turning to God in a new way. God desires to give us the hope. He wants to fill us with his light, a reminder of his love in all circumstances. So we need to turn to him and ask. We need to invite him more deeply and personally into our lives, and to open our hearts, and to take steps in our lives that will help us to do that, that'll help us to access this hope that Christmas brings, access it in a new way. And I'll share with you, just personally, this year, hope of Christmas has become a little more difficult for me to get to as well. I need this message as much for myself. Just the different challenges and things, worries, family, you know what I mean. You know better than I do. So I'm looking for the message too. So what do we need to do? Well, I'll tell you, St. Titus goes on to say a few things, or St. Paul to St. Titus says a couple things. The grace of God appeared, saving all and training us, he says, to reject godless ways and worldly desires, and to live temperately, justly, and devoutly in this age as we await the blessed hope. Turning towards God is always about conversion. It's always about saying yes to God in a new way and finding that hope by discovering his mercy, by turning away from whatever darkness we may carry with us in our soul, our struggle with sin and virtue. As Paul says to Titus again, reject godless ways and worldly desires that can so often consume us, and look to God in search of that blessed hope. Another important way of accessing this hope, I believe, is to look again at the story of the Nativity, the birth of Jesus. You know, in the story that we just heard proclaimed, so familiar to us, there's a tremendous amount of insight and wisdom into the way God works and the way God desires to bring hope to us for all time. We look at the story again of Jesus in the Nativity. It's helpful, Pope Francis encourages too, to reflect upon the nativity scene, which I'm sure so many of you have in your home, maybe several of them, to look at it again. It's not just a fixture, a decoration for Christmas. It actually carries great wisdom, and beauty, and insight. And what do we see when we look at the nativity scene? We see hope for the hopeless. We see hope for the hopeless. We see people in very difficult situations, but God is right in the midst of them. We can think first of Mary and Joseph. The gospel tells us that they were, in a sense, ordered by the Roman authorities to make a journey from Nazareth down to Bethlehem because that's where Joseph's family was from, a descendant of David. Bethlehem is a throwaway town in that time. The prophets had foretold that and announced that it was a place, a city too small to be among the clans of Judah, we heard recently in the first reading for the fourth Sunday of Advent. But yet, the prophets had also foretold that from this little place of little significance, would come the Savior, the Messiah. And so Joseph and Mary go there, and she's expecting. And while she's there, it comes time to give birth. We know the story, but think about it. They were homeless. They were homeless, without homes. They stay in a barn. The child, the newborn, is laid in the manger. What's the message in that for us? In our struggles and the difficulties, that's where God appeared. That's where the grace of God appeared. Jesus wasn't born into a wealthy, influential family. Jesus didn't appear to the Roman authorities. The message of the birth of the Messiah was carried by the angels to shepherds, the people who live on the margins, the people who were not at all part of the mainstream. They were actually very far from it. And yet, God's transcendent love and the message of hope goes first to them who come to adore. Now, that's really important for us to think about, because in one way or another, we're all poor spiritually. Even if we have great material wealth, there is a certain want that we experience in our lives, a longing, a desire for a deeper communion with God ultimately, and that can only be satisfied by God. And so accessing that hope that God truly desires to give it to us, it comes from humility, recognizing our solidarity with Mary and Joseph in their struggle and in their even want of no room in the inn, and the shepherds, and see in that scene again the renewed promise of hope, the presence of God with us that transforms our hopelessness into hope. One thing that always makes me or helps me to kind of get into the Christmas spirit and get out of any kind of a funk that I might be in at this time of the year, having difficulty accessing hope, without question, is music. And the beautiful music that we have here tonight, doesn't it just sort of kind of take your breath away, reminding us of the transcendent presence of God, that really God's love and God's power is greater than anything that can take our hope away. And sometimes it's even more subtle music, just those familiar hymns and carols, the sounds of the season that have been part of our life as Christmas probably since we were children. I had that moment. I had it recently, where a very familiar song. It talked about God bringing hopelessness to an end through the eternal hope that dawned in the world through Jesus. And it happened in that realization of looking at the humble nativity scene and remembering the words of a very familiar carol, but one that I heard in a new way, particularly a couple of verses. In one sense, I felt as though I'd never heard them before, but I think God really wanted me to hear it, and I hope He wants you to hear it as well. How silently, the wondrous gift is given, so God imparts to human hearts the blessing of His heaven. No ear may hear His coming, but in this world of sin, where meek souls will receive Him still, the dear Christ enters in. Where children pure and happy pray to the blessed child, where misery cries out to Thee, Son of the Mother mild, where charity stands watching and faith holds wide the door, the dark night wakes, the glory breaks, and Christmas comes once more. Merry Christmas.